It's a real pleasure to come back and to see so many familiar faces and also meet some new people. And of course we want to do, Ayya Chitananda and I want to do whatever we can to support you to have a very peaceful and productive retreat. And I want to talk a little bit about the retreat container, if you will, how we want to live together here in this week. One thing that we'll do is we'll take precepts during this time tonight. And we want to really think about this time as a sacred time. And some of the ways that we can bring that sacred energy or sacred sense in is by keeping silent. I think most of you have had a fair bit of experience with that, but some of you haven't, and don't be afraid, don't worry. If you come to a point where you really need to talk to someone, you can just let us know. And there are going to be opportunities to talk with us, to ask questions. This retreat, we're planning to have all of the questions written and in the basket, and I'm not planning on a Q&R evening. I'm planning on answering questions sort of as they come in, weaving them into other things that I'm talking about, and probably do a fair bit of Q&R. I like the R, right? Respond rather than answer. You get a response, whether or not it answers your question is something else, I guess. But I might do some of that at the 2:00 time where we meet, just to keep everybody awake. We'll see how it goes. So noble silence, if you're new to that term, means that we keep silent unless there's something important to say, to ask a question of someone or talk about something that really someone needs to know in order for things to run smoothly. And when we do that, we do it quietly as well. If it's important to tell someone something or to ask a question so that you know what to do next or something like that, then just quietly on the side, talk to someone. It's really a great practice because you start to really think about what do I really have to say and what do I not have to say. It's good reflection. And in that way, then we're also going to avoid using devices, phones, and other communication methods. Of course, if you need your phone for health reasons or you have to contact someone, you might have heard all of this already. I don't know if they talked to you about this before tonight, but to take your phone to the parking lot or go into your car or something like that to not disturb others, and to try to keep that at a minimum. Of course, the phones are so cool now that there are all kinds of things we use them for health reasons too, and it's perfectly okay. This is mainly about the idea of giving our minds an opportunity to become still, to relax, to rest, to not have so much input, so much impingement from sense stimulation. So write your questions. There's note paper and pens in the back and a basket on the table back there. And Ayya Chitananda and I will be looking at that quite frequently and collecting what's there. If you run into any problems in your practice or challenges or any kind of really big concern, or something that's not just something you want to write on a piece of paper and have answered in the room, then by all means just post a question. You could write it on paper and post it on the bulletin board addressed to us, and we'll take a look at it also, or talk to one of the retreat managers. If there's an emergency of some kind, I think you probably already have instructions for what to do. And if there's any kind of real problem, be sure to have somebody knock on our door. I want to talk a little bit about the schedule. And one thing to notice about it is it's only 5 nights. So, okay, if I say only, there's a perception of this being a very short retreat. But for some people, the perception might be that this is a long retreat. And whether we think it's short or long, whether it's 1 day or 5 days or 5 months, we want to really take the opportunity to really use this time. And as I said, bring in a sense of the sacred, that this time is precious. Because it's during times like these often that insight arises, that things change. We see a new direction for our practice. Maybe some long lingering questions get answered, not necessarily by me, but just in the practice itself. So a lot of it has to do with what we bring into the space and what we put our intention on, our attention, and how to set our intention for how we want to practice. I'd really like to encourage you to come to everything. And I want to talk a little bit about the schedule. There's quite a bit of openness and flexibility in it. But when we do meet together in here, it's really nice if everyone can be here. I know sometimes we might just really need to rest, that kind of thing, and then please take care of yourself. But if possible, then please come for the 6:30 in the morning sit and meditation, and chanting and meditation. And then at 9 o'clock, it might not always be a reflection, it might be some guided meditation at that time instead, so what's on your schedule might get moved around a little bit through the day, but we'll see what happens. Something will happen at 9 a.m. And then after that, I don't know exactly how long that session will last. It won't be more than an hour for sure, probably more like 45 minutes, I would say. We'll see. Then there's an open space for 2 hours, at least 2 or more hours, to meditate, sitting meditation, do walking meditation, and then there will be practice discussion sessions with me, and we'll be posting the list. We're starting tomorrow because we'll have practice discussion for the 4 days, the 4 full days. We'll have 1 session in the morning at 10 a.m. and we'll have another session in the afternoon at 2:45. And you'll have the opportunity to come to one of those sessions during these next 4 days. And the list and the timing will be on the bulletin board for tomorrow's groups. So we'll post that tomorrow morning at the morning sit. So you can look at the bulletin board and see if you're on the list. And I'm not sure if we know where to go. There's a little building over where the playground is. I think that's where we'll be meeting.
There's a cabin and it will have interview, you should say practice discussion, on the windows. So.
Okay, practice discussion or interview. They used to be called interviews, or sometimes they still are. Interviews, and that'll be a sign on the window. And there are 2 such spaces. Do you want to talk about what's going to happen in the other space? No, you.
So there will be slots to sign up for individual sessions, like 15-minute chunks, starting Tuesday and going through Thursday. She'll be talking to groups, and I'll do individual ones. Yeah, that's all.
You can see why the sessions will be brief and to the point. And after you hear me for a while, you're going to really appreciate that. Okay, and then in the afternoon also there's going to be a pretty big chunk of time between 2:45 and the light supper at 5 p.m. So you have that opportunity, both of those set periods, you can use your own intuition about what would be best for your practice, to do walking meditation, sitting meditation, and when to get up and when to change and do something else. And it's also I want to encourage a kind of valuing of this opportunity to really apply yourself to the practice, but also the development of our own intuition around what's best for us at the time. And sometimes the best thing is to go for a walk, but to know in yourself whether that's really just kind of escaping or seeking a way to take off the pressure. Sometimes we should take off the pressure. So it's something to know for yourself. Am I using this time in the way I would really like to use it? It's up to you. I think some of you might want to take the 8 precepts tonight. Would anyone like me? Let's see, I think I'll just explain it. By the way, these chanting books are the KBV chanting books, and we will need to take them back to KBV, so there will be chanting books at the monastery. But of course they're here for you to use now, and you also, if you fall in love with it, you can download it from our website and print it for yourself. On page 72, I think it is, or 70, let me see. Yeah, 72, we have the 3 refuges and the 8 precepts. Now, generally, the Buddha recommended that everyone keep the 5 precepts. And is there anyone who has not encountered the 5 precepts before? Would you mind raising your hand? Okay, there's someone. Okay. So the 5 precepts are on the previous page. Yeah, the chanting, do you have a chanting book? Okay, there's one on the table over there.
It looks like these black mats.
There's a spot over here too, where there's one. Is anyone else needing a chanting book? Yeah, there's one down here. Yeah, thank you.
There's also a couple random.
There are a couple laying around. We passed them out. Of course, we didn't know where you were going to be, so yeah, we'll find them for you. Okay. So if you leave them at your seat, they'll be there every day when we want to do some chanting. And okay. Thank you. So first of all, the 3 refuges, taking refuge in the Buddha. I'm sure that, often I think of the historical Buddha, but we also want to recognize that Buddha means awakened, the enlightened mind. Taking refuge in the fact that a Buddha appeared in the world and has, according to the suttas, many times in the past, that when Buddhism, the idea that Dhamma is lost, and then a Buddha will appear, will discover it again and come into the world and teach it, usually teach it. And we're very fortunate to have those teachings, so we'll talk about this more when we talk about the power of faith. But this is taking refuge in that awakened mind and that ability to awaken. And taking refuge in the Dhamma, taking refuge in the truth of the way things actually are. Taking refuge in the Sangha is to take refuge in the beings that became enlightened after the Buddha, through his pointing the way. And so this is the recognition that this is possible for all of us to awaken and live in that kind of purity of heart. Because once a person awakens, they naturally keep these precepts. Because they see how things actually work, and we wouldn't want to do anything else but keep them. And so we take refuge in that because regardless of what's happening in our life, regardless of what's happening in the world, this is what we can trust. And because we're going to be looking at the power of faith, I'll talk more about how that trust develops. It's never something that the Buddha never wanted people to just take it because they're being told they should believe it, not blind faith. I'll get more into that later. So repeating these refuges and taking them on. And if this is new to you, don't feel forced to do anything. You can just listen and kind of take in what this might mean. And then when we come to the 5 precepts, the first one is to refrain from taking the life of any living creature. I don't know if you've seen any ants or any other critters that you might not want to have in your room or anything like that, but to live by this first precept means to really want to avoid taking the life of any living being, any breathing being. That word, or being with life energy in it, the word in there in Pali is pana, which is the same as the Sanskrit prana. So that if you've ever trained in any yoga, you'll have heard that word. The prana is that life force energy. It's also related to the breath. So when we're careful and caring about even the smallest living beings, we really develop kindness in our heart. When we have a friend who, the way she thinks of the precepts is that this first precept, if we really follow it and we take it to its complete depth, we give up all hatred. Just something to think about. And the second one is the precept to refrain from taking what's not given. So it's not stealing, but it's also an awareness, a care around recognizing whether or not something is really intended for us to take, whether it's really something that everyone feels is fine for us to have it, to take it. And so it's wonderful to live in a space where, all of us, none of us have to worry about someone taking our things or, taking up what is not offered. It's really a beautiful thing. And in looking at this, what is it like when you take that precept to its fullest development? We give up greed. And then the third one is one that it's going to be a little bit different. In the 5 precepts, it's to refrain from sexual misconduct. But in the 8 precepts, which is what we're going to take and what's expected anytime you're in a retreat situation, and certainly anytime you're in a monastery. Also, monastic retreat, which is whether you know it or not, is what you've signed up for this week. And it means avoiding any kind of sexual activity. And then the 4th precept, which is the same in the 5 or the 8, is to refrain from false and harmful speech. And actually, the language there that we're also going to recite, you'll just follow along if you don't know it already. And however you say it is fine. But it's really saying, it really says to not lie, to not speak falsehood. And of course, when we are dedicated to truth and making sure that our words really represent what's true, then we eventually let go of delusion. We really come to the truth of the way things are. And the 5th precept is to avoid alcohol and drugs, which lead to carelessness, is the way that's translated here, that cause us to lose our clarity and make it really impossible to be mindful. And this also really helps us to overcome delusion, to refrain. And so in this environment, we'll practice this together. And I sometimes imagine a world where everybody keeps the 5 precepts, and I think, wow, that would be so awesome. No need for locks on the doors, or anyway, you get it. It's really quite beautiful. And when we really think about it, it can take us to the end, all the way to the end of the path. So you have an opportunity to just use those 5 precepts with that alteration of the 3rd one, to avoid any kind of sexual activity. Or you can decide that you'd like to take the other 3 as well. And these are not moral precepts, but they're training precepts. And their value, I found, when I started monastic life, I was in white robes as an anagarika. I mean, in certain phases I was in white robes for 5 years, which is longer than most people, and for various reasons. And some of those periods of time were really kind of this word on an anagarika, someone who's left home. And the anagarika is usually living in a monastic situation where they're learning about how to live in a monastic life, and they're also doing a lot of service in that environment. And then there were other times when I would say the way I was living during those 5 years was much more what might be called a Mei-chi, which is a nun in a form that's common in Thailand. And regardless of which way that was, it was a very interesting time to really develop an understanding of what these 3 precepts are about, because it's an 8 precept form. So instead of going on to having 10 precepts, or now we have 311 as bhikkhunis, you really start to see what those additional precepts, those additional 3 precepts have to offer. And what I realized, so the first one there, which is really number 6, is to refrain from eating at inappropriate times. So if you do that during this retreat, then you'll skip the light supper in the evening, and it helps us to, and some people feel that it really helps to support meditation because you're not going so heavy. We still keep these precepts, so what I find is usually my health actually improved when I stopped eating dinner. And it's an interesting practice to look at when am I really hungry and what does my body really need. And of course, in these last few years, there's been a big move towards intermittent fasting. It's like, yeah, the Buddha had that down a long time ago. And it can be very good for your health. But it's also very good to help you watch the mind and see what the mind is desiring and reflect on what it really needs. And then there are a few things you can use as medicines if the body is low in energy, or finding for health reasons there needs to be some support. The next one is to refrain from entertainment, beautification, and adornment, and we really want to encourage that for everyone. So that 6th precept is optional, but the 7th one, we would really like you to stay away from entertainment. Just don't worry about how you look. Don't beautify. Don't worry too much. Like some people say, do I have to take off my wedding ring? No. No. But, I think you get this already, but just recognizing how much of our sense of self is caught up in how we look, and that we can just drop that here, and we can just practice with whatever arises as a result. And the 8th one is about not lying on a high or luxurious bed. My guess is that no one has a high or luxurious bed waiting for them in the cabin, but it's really about indulging in sleep. And if you think about what the animal body wants when it's upset, or what we want when, for dealing with when we're upset, a lot of times instead of being present with what do we feel, we want to eat, we want to sleep, be entertained, maybe have sex. These are the kinds of things that we use to distract ourselves from our suffering. And it never leads us to resolving that suffering. So these precepts really help us to get really step firmly on the path of practice. Any questions? Right now you can just raise your hand and ask them. Yes?
The word undertake sounds like intention. I intend to, or this is my goal.
Should we pass the microphone? Is that helpful? Would you mind saying it? Thank you, Steve.
Yeah, I was just curious to understand better the word undertake.
Yeah, I'm making the resolve to do this. You know, like I'm undertaking this. I'm gonna do this, but it's not like a command. It's not like it's something very much with our own intention and our choice, our decision, and you know, we learn over time, or we already instinctually know that there are consequences to some of these things if we lie, if we steal, if we kill, you know. But it's not. The Buddha wasn't. How to say it? I want to say puritanical or something like that, not to give the Puritans a bad rap, but just, you know, like he would point out what are the results, what the results are of our actions. And so these are to be taken up as supports and training, and see what they're like. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
I just have a really quick question. I missed how we sign up for the individual sessions or interviews. Can you remind me? Sorry if I missed that.
No, it's okay. There will be sign-up sheets with time slots, and it's totally optional. Don't feel obligated. And I think I wrote on there, if you can sign up kind of consistent, like don't leave gaps, so I don't have to sit there all long and sad and crying. Okay, thanks.
But you're going to post it on the bulletin board?
It'll be on the bulletin board probably tomorrow. I made another page, but we'll have 3 days of it, and there are many slots that I don't think will get filled, so you'll have a chance, I'm sure.
Yes, Nancy. There's a microphone coming your way.
Well, you can tell where my mind always goes. I want to get back to number 6. Undertaking precept to refrain from eating at inappropriate times. Inappropriate times? What does that mean?
Oh, okay.
And who decided?
The Buddha decided. And it is awkward. It's an awkward way of putting it, and it's a translation, right? So, but the Buddha said, well, he had thousands of monks and nuns following him, and they were alms mendicants. So they would, like, we have our bowls. You're going to see us with our bowls tomorrow to collect food for the meal. And they were wandering through the villages and wherever, you know, to collect food, which is a thing in ancient India, and it still is. People will put food in your bowl in countries like that, and here too. We've experienced. And when there's a story that a monk was wandering for food, and it was already dark, and he came upon this woman who was milking her cow, and a flash of lightning hit, and she saw his silhouette, and she screamed. And then she saw that it was a monk, and she really lit into him. She was so upset. And so that's the story, and the Buddha said, you know, you really don't have to be doing this all night and day. Just eat between dawn and midday, and that's enough. And he said, that's what I do, and you're going to be fine if you just eat between dawn and midday. So all the rest of the time is inappropriate, just from midday until the next morning. As I said, and then as happens in the unfolding of the Buddha's teachings and the process of all these followers, lay and monastic, is that some of the monastics had health issues that they just couldn't deal with not having something later in the day. And they would come to him and say, I have this ailment, and this is what I need to eat. And he would say, okay, I allow that. And then another one would come with some other ailment, and they would say, I need this other thing to eat. And he would say, I allow that. And it goes through this over and over and over and over. And this is all recorded in the monastic code. And the picture is, like if you have diabetes and you need something later in the day, there are various traditions that have certain fixed things that we call allowables. But my view on it is then decide what you will use to help your body and then use that, but you're still very restrained. You're not really eating a meal. You're just, so that's the general background. I don't want to keep you too late because you may need to rest to kind of get into this, but I want to talk a little bit about the 5 powers, and particularly the power of faith, because I want to encourage you to practice with that tomorrow, and then in the evening I'll probably talk about the power of energy, and each night we'll have a chance to kind of let it soak in and work with it the next day. So first, the 5 powers, as you probably know, are faith, energy, mindfulness, samadhi, which is historically most of the time has been translated into English as concentration, but scholars have really changed their mind about that in recent years, because the word concentration has this kind of bearing down kind of implication that doesn't really help us to have really good samadhi so much. So I think I'll use stability of mind or stillness of mind and wisdom. So these 5 have, the Buddha lists them, these 5 qualities or these 5 abilities, you might say, as faculties, and he also lists them as powers. So when you see the lists of qualities to cultivate and develop, which include the foundations of mindfulness and the right efforts and the Noble Eightfold Path, the 7 factors of enlightenment, and these various lists that all fall into what in Pali is called the Bojjhangas, and in English, the Wings to Awakening. Sometimes this whole collection, 37 things in this list, among these lists. And the faculties and the powers are the same list. It's the same 5 things. And so sometimes people wonder why the Buddha talked about them in those 2 different ways, and the suttas don't really make it entirely clear. The Buddha says that the faculties become powers and the powers become faculties, so what does it mean? I have my own theory, and there have been many commentarial theories, I think, put forth, but I think of these 5 things as what we develop as faculties that we can possess, that we can make use of, and then when they really become much deeper, I think they become powers. I like to think of them as kind of like superpowers. And we're looking at these 5, at these powers during this week, but any of these collections that the Buddha used can be used as a way to draw upon the entire Dhamma. I think of it almost like a diamond with many facets, and this is one facet. but through it you can reach the whole of the Dhamma. This development can take us all the way to Nibbana. In fact, the Buddha says that. I don't have the quote with me right now, but it's like he's all of these, developing these powers really, we're inclining towards Nibbana. They lead to Nibbana. What I thought I would share with you is a short sutta called In Detail. There's one before it that's called In Brief, where the Buddha just lists the powers, like I just did. And now in detail, he said there are these 5 powers. The power of faith, the power of energy, the power of mindfulness, the power of stability of mind, and the power of wisdom. And what is the power of faith? Here, a noble disciple is endowed with faith, and they place faith in the enlightenment of the Tathagata, which is what the Buddha called himself, the Tathagata, thus come one, thus gone one. This enlightened Buddha. They place faith in the Tathagata, the Blessed One, and this is what their faith is in. The Blessed One is an Arahant, perfectly enlightened, accomplished in true knowledge and conduct, fortunate, knower of the world, unsurpassed trainer of persons to be tamed, teacher of devas, those are heavenly beings, and humans, and the enlightened one, the Blessed One. Putting this faith in the enlightenment of the Tathagata, this is called the power of faith. And I'll talk more about that in a minute. And what is the power of energy? A noble disciple has aroused energy for abandoning unwholesome qualities and acquiring wholesome qualities. They are strong, firm in exertion, not casting off the duty of cultivating wholesome qualities. This is called the power of energy. So of course I'm going to talk about this more tomorrow evening, but it's not so much like we're pushing ourselves to our absolute limits or anything like that. It's more about that consistency of practice, of really wanting to see our blind spots, really wanting to see what we can do to practice, to develop on the path, and to stick with it. And what is the power of mindfulness? Here, a noble disciple is mindful, possessing supreme mindfulness and alertness, one who remembers and recollects what was done and said long ago. This is called the power of mindfulness. And I'll talk all about that on Tuesday night, I think. And then the power of, here the translation is concentration, the power of concentration or stillness, stability of mind, the power of samadhi. Sometimes I'd rather just not translate it to really get a sense of what samadhi is when you're experiencing it. And here, the Buddha talked about being secluded from sensual pleasures, secluded from unwholesome states. The practitioner enters and dwells in the first jhana, which consists of rapture and pleasure born of seclusion, accompanied by thought and examination, and then goes on to talk about the other 3 jhanas. So we'll talk about that when we get to that part, and other ways of experiencing and cultivating samadhi. And the 5th one is the power of wisdom. Now, wisdom is defined in different ways in the suttas, depending on what the Buddha is trying to point out. But here he says, A noble disciple, a practitioner, is wise. They possess the wisdom that discerns arising and passing away, which is noble and penetrative and leads to the complete destruction of suffering. This is called the power of wisdom. So he's drawing upon this realization that everything in this world arises and ceases. It's impermanent, changing. And that when we really penetrate that reality fully, it leads to the complete destruction of suffering, to enlightenment. So that's a in detail, but still fairly brief description of the 5 powers. So what about faith? So faith is a challenging word for many people in our culture. They may have some wounding from previous religious experience, or they may find the word faith really wonderful and inspiring because they had good experiences in the past with faith. So it's the word in Pali is saddha, and it can also be translated as confidence, which if that gives you more of a sense, then use that one. Because the Pali words are so rich that it really isn't easy to translate many of them with one English word. And if you have any experience with learning a second language, you probably know words like that appear in that language, and you really can't use one word to describe it in English or vice versa. I got into, even though I've never mastered a second language or even come close to it, I grew up in a family that was all Dutch, and there were certain Dutch words that still got used, and there's no way to describe some of those things in English with one word, certainly. Maybe even, a whole sentence or paragraph might be needed, And so that's the way it is with Pali and English too. So saddha, developing this confidence, this faith, is what we need in order to really dig into the practice. Some sense that it really is possible for the suffering to end. And sometimes this arises in a person even when they haven't had any exposure to it before, and then they come across the Four Noble Truths, and the first one saying there's dukkha, there's suffering. And I know some people, as soon as they see that, they feel like someone's finally understanding what they're experiencing in life. And then there's the going on through the Four Noble Truths is like there's a way out of this suffering. And that right there, they'll have enough faith in that possibility based on just those statements to want to practice. So there are all kinds of different ways we can experience faith or confidence. And I really appreciate that we're never asked to just pick up something we're told without being able to verify it for ourselves. Let me try to put some important, I think, coloring around that, some understanding around that, because it doesn't mean that we only take in and practice with what we already know. We can put into context what we already know, listening to the full scope of what the Buddha taught. But we also want to open ourselves to exploring the parts that we don't yet know for ourselves. And when the Buddha says, don't just accept it because I'm telling you this, he's not saying reject it if you don't already know it for yourself, because that would be ridiculous. We'd never wake up. Instead, it's to have enough confidence in the Buddha because you already recognize so many things that he has taught to be true, that those things we don't yet know for ourselves directly, we can discover and experience, realize through practice. We have to have a certain amount of faith, though, or confidence, willingness to step into that unknown space. And I feel like my own faith was really in the Buddha, was really developed bit by bit, Sometimes I'll say brick by brick. It's like it's solid now. It's really clear to me that the Buddha was right about what he was teaching, and he had the image, the picture of the whole thing. And I see how the Dhamma, how the monastico, the Vinaya really covers everything. And not only does it really address everything we experience, but it points to what's beyond this conventional reality. So if we don't yet experience things for ourselves, experience may not be the right word, see it, know it directly, realize it ourselves, then to keep an open mind, to use the practice that we're given, because many people can recognize the value in the way the Buddha described how to meditate, how to keep moral virtue. We can experience the change in us and the change in our lives when we do something like pick up the 5 precepts and live that way. It really cuts down on the stress, on the problems. So this is we start to develop faith in this way. Another part that was really helpful for me, many of you know that my son was a Buddhist monk, and that's how I got exposed to the Dhamma. When I had the opportunity to be with monks quite a lot. And some of them are so incredibly advanced and amazing. What I could learn from them, or what they could offer to people, and the way they could understand you, the way they could see into your mind, the way they could support you in unlocking some of the deep old conditioning and things like that, to really experience that kind of thing caused me to have great faith in the Sangha. That is really possible to awaken. It is really possible for you to awaken. This is another part of faith. Faith in the Dhamma, seeing that, all things that arise do cease. We have to look again and again and again and again. We know the body is going to die, for example. But as human beings, most human beings really try to avoid thinking about it. And then don't practice with this truth, this reality. Probably because they don't see any benefit to it. They don't want to reflect on it. It's just an ugly, dreaded kind of conclusion to human life that you just want to put off and avoid and not look at, and spend as little time and energy or, on it as possible. I think this is so many people's experience. But when we really look at the Dhamma, and the Buddha's encouraging us to really look at this, every day. We talked about reflecting on death with every breath, or every mouthful of food, or something like that. Just to have that understanding that everything arises, ceases. And I think some amount of faith is needed to want to explore in that way, to recognize that there's a value in really understanding, in really realizing the truth of this arising and ceasing. Whatever comes into being will go out again. So just this past few days, someone in our community's mother is dying, and she died this morning around 9:30. Been in some pretty close contact, even though she's in India. We've been talking over WhatsApp and messaging back and forth, and she's been really working with this, with the Dhamma, really looking at the nature of reality, of conventional reality. And even though it was hard to see her mother suffer, she was trying as best she could to make her comfortable, as best she could to work with the medical team and all of that. She said, "I feel weirdly calm." It's like prepared, knowing she could be there to encourage her mother, remind her how much she loves her, what a wonderful mother she's been. And yet, there was this acceptance, this solidity in her, that her other family members, couldn't experience. They haven't reflected on this. They haven't recognized that this is the nature of things. And so when we start to recognize and we start to experience how the Dhamma arises in us in those times, and to see what's true, then we start to gain more faith, more confidence in the practice, more confidence in the whole range of the practice, not just meditation, but also keeping moral virtue and developing our wisdom. And it takes these 5 powers working together, really. Or we could take some other set of pieces, components that the Buddha talks about, and look at that in the same way. But right now we're looking at these 5 powers. And as these 5 powers work together, to have the faith and put in the energy, have the mindfulness, we'll talk about that, all of these things, and samadhi and wisdom. It takes us to a point of really being clear and solid and resilient in our life. That we can be with whatever it is that's arising. Because there's a deeper stability, there's a deeper place to reside, to depend upon, that we can recognize and experience any moment by witnessing rather than being caught up in what we're experiencing. There is solid ground. So one of the aspects of practicing with faith is to reflect on what you do trust in the Dhamma, in the Buddha, and to allow that to bring up joy. I really have a lot of confidence in the efficacy of the precepts. And whenever people take the precepts, there's this joy that arises in me. And all of the things that what you know already about the Buddha's teachings, what you know already about what the Buddha did, whatever it is that you know about the reality that the Buddha was pointing at, use that as some fuel, as some encouragement to open and be able to move in even more deeply into the investigation of your own mind, your heart. So all of that might, however it's landing with you, you can be present with that, and it might raise questions, or it might raise curiosity, or it might just go by with like, hey, I'm tired and I want to go to sleep, and it's all okay. And I hope you rest well tonight, and that tomorrow is a really beautiful day of practice. So the plan is to see you back here at 6:30 in the morning to meditate together and to chant, do some chanting. And we'll take it from there. Is there anything else?
I think we might still be missing some interview sheets. So
What?
I think we might still be missing some interview sheets.
Oh,
so.
if you haven't turned in the questionnaire that you were given when you arrived, please do that. We might be missing a couple, because we'll use that to put you into groups to discuss the Dhamma together. Okay. So I think we'll do a chant before we leave.
And we'll do page 30. The paragraph in English, it's called Reflections on the Universal Activity. Now let us chant the reflections on universal well-being.
May I abide in well-being, in freedom from affliction, in freedom from hostility, in freedom from ill will, in freedom from anxiety, and may I maintain well-being in myself. May everyone abide in well-being, in freedom from hostility, in freedom from ill will, in freedom from anxiety, and may they maintain well-being in themselves. May all beings be released from all suffering, and may they not be parted from the good fortune they have attained. When they act upon intention, all beings are the owners of their action and inherit its results. Their future is born from such action, companion to such action, and its results will be their home. All actions with intention, be they skillful or harmful, of such acts they will be the heirs. And then we'll do the closing homage on page 20. In English. 20. Page 20. There's a closing homage, and we'll do it in English.